Much of Central Park became Hooverville, a shanty town for the newly impoverished, named for President Herbert Hoover, in office during the market crash and widely blamed for it, pictured above, 1933. An old woman receives her Thanksgiving ration of food as other hungry people wait in line for the same, 1930. A woman pulls her baggage as she pushes her baby in a pram, circa early 1930s. Talman Street in Northwest Brooklyn, 1936. Children play in the gutter in the southern section of the Bronx, 1936. The Manhattan Bridge as seen from Pike and Henry Streets, littered with trash, 1936. A child sits on the fire escape of the tenement in which she lives, circa mid-1930s. A large group of people wait on a food line, 1932. A man stands beside his traveling tin shop in Brooklyn, 1936. A vacant lot in the southern section of the Bronx, 1936. Unemployed men smoke cigarettes amid their shantytown in Lower Manhattan, 1935. However, while poverty plunged New York to new depths, the city's ambitious construction projects pushed it to new heights. During the Great Depression, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, Radio City Music Hall, Rockefeller Center, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and more were all completed. A worker on the Empire State Building hangs by a steel beam, 1931. A laborer during construction of the Empire State Building, 1931. The soon-to-be-completed Empire State Building, 1931. Construction on the Empire State Building, 1931. The recently completed Chrysler Building, circa 1930. A workman rides a crane hook during construction of the Empire State Building, 1931. The recently opened Radio City Music Hall, 1934. A laborer sits on the frame of an unfinished building overlooking Manhattan, 1935. The recently completed 30 Rockefeller Center, 1933. Unemployed men sit at the docks, 1934. Men wait on a breadline, 1932. Clotheslines rest over the court of a crowded Upper East Side tenement, 1936. World War I veterans board a bus in Lower Manhattan bound for upstate New York's Fort Slocum, where a government relief program offered $1 a day reforestation jobs, 1933. Women talk while one of their children plays in the gutter in the southern section of the Bronx, 1936. Two waiters serve lunch to steel workers on a girder of the famous, soon-to-be-completed Waldorf Astoria Hotel, 1930. Unemployed, single women march to demand jobs, 1933. The hungry wait to be fed outside St. Peter's Mission, circa 1932. Woolworth's employees on strike for a 40-hour work week, 1937. Construction in progress on the Empire State Building with the Chrysler Building in the background, 1931. Children's protest parade for better housing conditions, circa 1930 to 1933. A bootblack at work outside the New York Savings Bank, 1937. Men on the street outside a chicken shop at an unspecified location, 1938. The first session of the Communist National Convention, at the Manhattan Opera House on June 24, 1936. As the Great Depression put more and more people out of work and plunged them into poverty, communism became an increasingly attractive ideology. The Empire State Building under construction, 1931. Leading New York gangster Charles "Lucky" Luciano in his 1931 mugshot following an arrest on charges of leading a prostitution ring. After the prohibition of the 1920s allowed organized crime to thrive behind illegal alcohol sales, gangsters entered the 1930s with a new level of wealth and power. It was during this time that Luciano and several other key crime figures, including Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky, helped establish the Five Families and bring the New York Mafia into its modern form. Angry crowds gather outside Lower Manhattan's Bank of United States following its devastating collapse, 1931. The Williamsburg Bridge as seen from the Brooklyn side, 1937. A woman on strike stands on Manhattan's 7th Avenue, 1936. Weighing the catch at the Fulton Market in Lower Manhattan, 1934. Pushcart Market in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn, 1939. Inside McSorley's Old Ale House, which opened its doors in the mid-19th century and remains one of New York's oldest operating pubs today, in the East Village, 1937. A family gathers on their stoop on J Street in Brooklyn, 1936. Bathgate Avenue in the Bronx, an area popular with federal subsistence homesteaders coming in from New Jersey, 1936. Young men gather in front of re-election signs for President Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose federal relief programs helped the city through the Great Depression to a great extent, in Midtown Manhattan, 1936. Elected in 1933, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia helped New York weather the Great Depression as best it could. The city's first ever mayor of either Southern or Eastern European descent, he unified the city's poor immigrant populations, most of which came from that region. Given his close association with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, he also enacted scores of social and economic relief programs. Pictured, LaGuardia giving a radio broadcast, 1940. Ultimately, the Great Depression exposed just how bad poverty in much of the city had already been for decades. In response, LaGuardia's initiatives saw thousands of slums and tenements fixed, torn down, or rebuilt, making way for a newer, better New York that would see extraordinary economic growth in the coming decades. Pictured, Lower Manhattan, circa 1931.